Welcome to the latest edition of The Pulse with BP. I'm your host, Billy Parvatam. I'm so pleased to be joined by a longtime friend of mine. We go back to my high school days. He's well known in the VHSL, FCPS basketball circles. He's alumni of the University of Virginia, but currently associated with his high school, Thomas Jefferson High School of Science and Technology. None other than Coach Mark Gray-Mendes. I just call him Coach, but Coach, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a while.
Great to be with you, Billy.
So what have you been doing? I mean, quarantine, we're facing this pandemic that we've been dealing with for the last 4 months or so. What have you been doing to keep busy?
Well, so I just moved from sort of in Annandale, just moved out to Centerville. So made a little move out west, upgraded in the size of my space a little bit. So that's been keeping me busy for most of the time the last month or so. But just spending a lot of time, working on sort of trying to refine my craft as far as being a coach. There's a ton of resources out there. It's one of the things that's been sort of real positive about everything we've been going through. Obviously, it's a devastating situation, and we all want to be on the floor. Normally, this time of year, I'd be coaching my AAU guys. I got a couple of your boys from Marshall High School, Andrew Hayden and Joe Musgrove, on my team, and I've coached a ton of Marshall guys in the past. That's what I'd like to be doing right now, along with my wife, who serves also as our assistant coach. But there's a ton of resources out there, a lot of coaching networks that I've had the opportunity to try to listen and learn from a lot of those folks, and really try to smooth over some areas that I've had difficulty with over the years. So that's been a real positive.
And you started this thing on Instagram where you would go on these ridiculous long walks. I consider it a success if I go 10,000 steps in a day. You were going 10, 12, 13 miles.
Yeah.
What inspired that?
Yeah, so that was the Coach Mark Challenge. It was something that I was doing back when I lived in Annandale. I had to kind of put it on pause now because, of the move. One of the good things about living in Annandale is it's right sort of smack in the middle of Northern Virginia. So a lot of the schools that are around are, in many different directions. Now I'm sort of out west in Centerville. I'd be taking the same path to get to almost everywhere, and some of those walks would be a lot longer. But basically, it was just something that I decided, I want to stay active. I want to keep moving as much as I can. And, it's difficult to find ways to get good exercise when you're in this situation. You can't go to the gym. I now, where I live right now, I've got a Lifetime Fitness right across the street, which is great because I'm looking forward to getting some run over there at some point. But, I'm not ready to play basketball yet under the circumstances. That's one of the more dangerous things you can do right now, especially with folks you're not familiar with. So that's, just the desire to get out and get moving, and also to see parts of Fairfax County. I've lived in this area for most of my life, and I've seen a lot of the areas that you can drive by, but there are a ton of really great places to walk, and trails and nature paths, and spaces that have been set aside for you to really enjoy. And that's something that I really got a big kick out of, is going on some of these trails and walking paths. It was a lot of fun. It was really enjoyable. I'm hoping to be able to get back to that at some point here. But the last one I did was over to Robinson, and I did not sunscreen myself appropriatly, and I am very, very white, so I pretty much roasted myself, and I still got a big old tan line back here from like a month ago. So I had to sort of pump the brakes a little bit.
I want to talk about your number one passion, which is coaching. You are, I don't know if you're embarrassed to have me say this, but you're the all-time winningest coach in the history of Thomas Jefferson High School. What made you want to decide to get into coaching?
Well, so that's actually a fun story. So when I was back in high school, so a long time ago, obviously, I was actually a junior, and I had just finished my first year on the varsity at TJ. And the guy that I had played JV for the year previous is a guy named Mark Travis, who's now on my staff. He coached the JV for a number of years for me, and obviously for my predecessor, Coach Ed Grimm, a long time before that. But he was running a JV spring league out at West Springfield High School at the time. And that was really the only off-season thing that was going on in our program back in, I'm dating myself now, but this was back in 2002. So a long time ago. And so he had somebody else who had played on my JV team coaching that. and that guy bailed out at the last minute the night before. So he called me up on the phone and says, this is like, 10 o'clock PM on a Friday night. He knows I'm going to be free because, what am I doing? And so he says, hey, can you do me a favor? I need you out at West Springfield tomorrow to coach games at 10 o'clock and at noon. And I go, oh yeah, sure, whatever. And so I go over there, and it's a bunch of guys that I kind of knew a little bit who had been on the freshman team the year previous. And so I go out there and I just try to put them through the paces a little bit. And, I had no idea what I was doing, but I did have a lot of enthusiasm and a loud voice. And I'm sure you remember that from your time over there on the sidelines yourself. And, at the end, I found myself just having so much fun with it. That I go, man, I called the Coach Travis back the next day and go, hey, can I keep doing this? Like, is the other guy, is he doing you a favor? Because I would like to continue doing this. And he goes, absolutely, please take this on. And so I did that. In that summer, I went to go work a camp over at the Bullis School, which I had attended for many years as a player. And a guy over there by the name of Coach Mike Hibbs was the head coach there for a long time. He was running a camp over there that I thought was a ton of fun. So I figured, what the heck, I'll show up one day and ask for a job. And so he let me run camps over there. I ran the JV Summer League for TJ over at Marshall back when Kevin Roller was the JV coach over there. And a fun story, that's actually where I ended up meeting my wife. You've met Allison, I'm sure, many times. Yep. She did the book for us for many years. And so she was running the JV Summer League over there, doing the book and the clock. And we kind of got to know each other there a little bit, and then got disconnected for a few years. She started working back at TJ, and I got to meet up with her again there, and the rest is history. So, I spent a lot of years doing the team camp thing and the summer league thing. When I graduated from University of Virginia, I asked the guy who was the head coach, Ed Grimm at the time, hey, can I join the staff? And he said, absolutely, feel free to come on board. So I was an assistant on the freshman team, sat on the bench for the varsity for a few games as well. And then the following year after that, I became the head freshman coach. And 2 years after that, I ended up becoming the varsity head coach. So, and that was at the age of 25. So probably a little bit before I was ready for it, but it's been a heck of a ride.
Yeah, you and Allison, of course, the ultimate coaching duo. What's your favorite part of coaching?
Oh man, there are a lot of favorite parts of coaching, but I would say just the ability to connect with these kids. I'm an alum of Thomas Jefferson, so I sort of understand a little bit of what they go through in the classroom on a day-to-day basis, and to be able to speak to them on their level, be able to connect with them, interact with them, not just in terms of what they're doing on the basketball court, but also to help them specifically develop strategies that are going to help them attack the rest of their lives and what they're going to do moving forward. These are obviously kids who are extremely bright, extremely gifted, but learning how to use those abilities to better those around you and to really be contributors to your surroundings and to the world at large is what really sort of gets me going as a coach.
Is there a coach out there that you admire, whether it's NBA or college? I know you're a UVA grad. Is Tony Bennett that guy? Is there someone else that you really admire?
There are tons of them, and it's a great question. Tony Bennett is definitely one of them, and he is a guy who I think not just on the court but also off the court embodies a lot of the values that I want to see both myself and our program, make sure that's what we're about. He has sort of a 5 pillars of a successful program for him, which is, I'm getting the order wrong, but it's humility, passion, unity, servanthood, and thankfulness. And so I sort of took that and turned it around a little bit for our program at Jefferson. And our core values are integrity, hard work, leadership, self-discipline, and teamwork. And those are the things that we build our program around. And so I would say he's definitely a big one as far as, the high school coaches in the area. Obviously, my predecessor, Coach Ed Grimm, is somebody that I hold in extremely high regard. And it was a great honor to be the next steward of the program after he finished up. But additionally, I mean, there are tons of other coaches in the area. Basically everybody in our district, I think, is fantastic. I think the guys in the national district just do a tremendous job. Obviously, Coach Dan Hale was one of those for a very long time. He came in at Marshall at the same time as I did, and we had the better of them for a couple of years as he was building the program, and then they had the better of us for pretty much the remainder of the time after that. But there are just tons of other guys. Kevin Roller from Madison is outstanding. And I got to know him while we were coaching against each other when we were in the same district over at McLean. I think that guys like Carlos Poindexter at Hayfield do a tremendous job. Brian Metris at Lake Braddock is one of the only guys who's been around longer than I have. Doug Craig at Woodson does a tremendous job, and Tony Bentley at Wakefield. I mean, they've obviously been an amazing program for a very long time. I know you've had a chance to see them in action. So. There are just such great people in this area who are in this coaching profession, but really, brotherhood, fraternity, or whatever it is you want to call it. It's really a great group of individuals, and I'm glad that I've had the chance to make connections with so many of them.
Yeah, that's something I always admired, was that it really seemed like the respect that you guys had as coaches extended beyond the court, not just on the court for each other. Is there a
Definitely.
memorable game or a memorable season that really stands out to you, whether it's a single game or is it a season you really think, man, that was a heck of a season, most gratifying? Any of that stick out to you?
Well, those are a lot of different questions, and I want to make sure I shout out one more guy too that I failed to mention previously. Another guy who's been a huge sort of mentor to me is Coach Jerry Lynn. I know you got to know him pretty well while he was at Marshall. Also, I wanted to mention him too. I've been working with him for years through the Nova Cavaliers program, and so I wanted to make sure I got that shout out in too. Jerry was actually one of the groomsmen at my wedding, so we've been very close for a long time. But anyway, you asked about seasons that were memorable, teams that were memorable. And oddly enough, the first one I'm going to mention is going to be the team that actually I had the worst record I've had as a coach so far with. I had a team at TJ that only won 3 games. And, part of the reason for that was it was a group of seniors that was really loyal and dedicated, and I loved them to death. But the group of guys weren't necessarily basketball players. And then we had a group of juniors behind them that were a little bit more talented but they weren't quite ready to step up and take that leap yet. And that team only won 3 games. Like I said, they went 3-20, but I knew that every single night those guys were going to come out and they were going to battle. They were going to give me everything they had. We never had a bad practice that year. Every day we would get in the gym and they were all rowing the boat in the same direction. And that was something that was extremely important, to all of the teams that we've had. It's something that I want to be a part of our program at all times. And so that group, I think, actually embodied those ideals the best. And it's no accident that a lot of those guys have gone on to be really successful in their own lives, even though we didn't win a ton of games, on the floor. But that was the group that really have a great fondness for. I would say the group that was the most talented and maybe the one that ended up having the most success was probably my group in, I think it was 2017. We had a couple of handlers, Matt Bojak and Noah Barnes. I know those names are probably going to be somewhat familiar to you from back then. And a number of other guys who were just really hard workers. And that team had great chemistry. They fit together really well. Their basketball IQ was very high, and they had, an ability to sort of blend concepts that they had learned from years of playing together. They were really successful in the freshman level, on the JV level, and it was no accident that was the year that we were able to sort of get over the hump finally, and we were able to knock off Edison in a great overtime thriller that got us to the regional tournament for the first time in a few years. So those guys. They really sort of that they've all gone off and done wonderful things. Noah Barnes in particular is a sophomore that passed Caltech. He was the freshman of the year in his conference, and he's got great things ahead of him.
Speaking of,
I want to make sure I still got you over there.
Yeah, speaking of TJ, you obviously know this because you are an alum of TJ, but TJ, comes with a lot of different stereotypes. Not forget just the basketball court. I mean, in the classroom. I mean, especially with the large South Asian community and East Asian community. They come in with their own stereotypes, whether it's from their families, and you obviously have seen that both as a coach but as a student. And you've talked about making sure TJ is known as more than just academics, school wise. How do you combat those stereotypes with your students and the school?
So, that's a great question. And I think, when I was working in the activities office, that was a major focus of what I was trying to accomplish. I made a lot of visits to middle schools over the course of about 4 years that I was working with the admissions office, just trying to get folks in the area to understand that TJ was more than just a place where you come in, you button up a lab coat, and you're looking at a microscope all day, because that is the thing that a lot of people think about Jefferson. And one of the things that not a whole lot of people realize is that when people interact with TJ, most of them actually do it through the athletic department, because more people will watch our football team, for example. We'll get a ton of people watching that, or a basketball game on Friday night at Wakefield, and that's going to be how a lot of people interact with our school. And so one of the things that I made sure was a big priority for for everybody who's in the athletic program at the time, was basically, let's make sure that we're representing ourselves in a way that's going to be with class, that's going to be with dignity, where we're going to go out there and we're going to work as hard as we can, and we're going to want to win ball games to the extent that we can. But at the same time, to make sure that we're doing it in a way so the name in the front of the jersey is really well represented. I think it's something of a burden being at one of the highest academic high schools that's out there in the country. And actually, I mean, Marshall's on that list too now at this point. Marshall's an exceptional public school. And, I know that puts a smile on your face, but I'm not telling any tales. It's a great school. And so, I think that that carries with it a certain burden, because, folks are going to be always sort of looking up at you from an academic perspective. And, there's a healthy skepticism out there about what we're able to do from an athletic perspective. And I don't think a lot of people know about how successful TJ has been in a lot of areas. I mean, our boys tennis team was set to win their 8th consecutive Virginia state championship this past year. Swim and dive always does tremendously well. Our running sports usually do very well. Our golf team had won a ton of district championships in a row. In those individual sports, we've always done very, very well. It's in the team sports where we've struggled a little bit over the years. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that, our kids, a lot of them haven't ever played together before they set foot on their freshman basketball team. It's the first time they've had a chance to play together. In some cases, it's their first time really approaching the sport. I know that's frequently the case for our football team. So, that was really one of the biggest, I guess, points of emphasis for me. And, another thing that I know I mentioned that 2017 team a little bit earlier, but one of the things that I was maybe the most proud of with that group is that after the season, they were honored with the Cardinal Basketball Officials Association Sportsmanship Award, which I thought was really cool. It was the first time that association had ever given that award. And they were, they were well deserving of it. And I was told that, that they sort of won it going away, and that there was not really a big question about, who was gonna get it. And for me, that was a real positive, that they were recognized for something that is sort of a core bulwark of our program, which is that, you treat people with respect, you do things the right way, and you make sure that at all times, you are conducting yourself with dignity and with honor and with integrity when you're on the basketball court.
So do you think, you've been successful in helping to change the culture? There's still some things to take care of. Is it a mixed bag? How would you assess after all these years being involved with TJ? Has the culture successfully changed?
Well, I mean, I'm no longer in the activities office. I did that for 6 years. I've sort of moved on, and now I'm, my 9 to 5 is elsewhere. But I don't know. I think that I think that, if anything, we are certainly a bigger presence on social media, which hopefully helps people to learn a little bit about what we're about. I had a fairly significant hand in that, but maybe, even more credit belongs to our head athletic trainer, who does a lot of that work for us. That's Heather Murphy, and she does a spectacular job with all of that stuff now. And she's pretty much solely responsible for it at this point, since I'm no longer in the activities office. I think people, if they're looking for information about us in our athletic program, I think they know a little bit more about it, but I think there's still some work to be done. I'd like to see, some things, I'd like to see some things continue to change. I'd like to see it be maybe a little bit more of a priority for the kids in the building. I would like for them to go to the games. I would like for them to show up and be, let their voice be heard, because when they do, we are really, really tough to beat. We had our senior night game this past year against Trinity Meadowview, the best Trinity Meadowview team I've seen in several years. And, that was a hard fought game, but I think it was the huge crowd that we had that night that really pushed us over the edge. And so, I want to see that more often, not just for boys basketball, but for all of our sports, because the kids at TJ work just as hard to prepare for their seasons as anybody else does. And they deserve that same level of support, even though it's tough for our kids because they live all over the place. In most cases, they live closer to the schools that we're playing against than they do to our school because of where we're located. So, I'd like to see a little bit more engagement in that area. But it's been sort of it's always a work in progress.
As a high school basketball coach, and before we kind of transition out of this area, obviously we're in the middle of a pandemic. We don't know how it's going to be in a month, 2 months, 3 months, end of the year. How confident are you that high school basketball will be played on some level this upcoming academic year?
Oh boy, I don't know. I think it's way too early to make any judgments about that. Obviously, I'm hopeful because it's what I love to do. I love being able to interact with the kids and see them every day. Everything I see in terms of what's going on locally here in Northern Virginia seems to be relatively positive in terms of case numbers and in terms of hospitalizations. It seems like we're doing maybe a little bit better here than in a lot of places in the country, but at the same time, it's really hard to say. I mean, basketball is an indoor sport. The level of contact and closeness is unavoidable. I think it's really hard to say, and the landscape on this thing is changing really on a daily basis. And so I think it's difficult. I'm hoping for the best, but at the same time, there are people who are much higher up than me, and I don't envy them having to make those decisions. Even so much as how we're going to open the new school year. I will say it's really difficult for me to envision a scenario where we're playing high school sports when kids are in school every other day. Like that seems, I don't know how that works. I think that's going to be a really difficult thing to navigate in terms of, well, are sports practicing every day, or am I going to only we haven't gotten a whole lot of advisement from the VHSL on that so far. And so I think it's really difficult to be able to even visualize that at this point.
What's your thoughts on professional sports returning? MLB and the NBA both slated to return at the end of July. I know you're a big sports fan.
Definitely.
I guess a lot of people were a little more excited maybe a few weeks ago when this was kind of coming into place. But now I think with the resurgent in cases across the country, it's maybe dimmed down a little bit, at least some people's expectations of the season. What are your thoughts on the whole situation?
Well, I mean, yeah, you nailed it. I think I am a big sports fan, and I love, I was really excited for spring training and for watching my Orioles. Please, guys, don't hold it against me. I was raised that way. I was really excited about it. I've been a season ticket holder for the last couple of years. We were planning on doing it again, and then everything shut down. And I think you really nailed it with the way you set up your question, because, a few weeks ago it was like, all right, we're moving this thing in a positive direction. It seems like we're in a good place, and, looking forward to getting things going. And then, you hear about all of these different, cases of relatively high profile guys. You hear about like Freddie Freeman test positive, and, there's still some things in the NBA going on, and folks opting out and so on. And you look back and you sit there and you kind of go, yeah, I can't blame you. I can't blame you for wanting to stay safe, wanting to make sure that you're not, endangering members of your family. I know with the Nationals, you had, Ryan Zimmerman has opted out of the season already, as well as I think Juan Soto is under protocol now. That just came out today. So it's, I don't know. It's a little harder to be really fired up for it, but you just hope that these leagues are doing everything that they can from a safety perspective to make sure that that these folks who are really important to us as a society in the long term are being protected, being taken care of, and that that we're not exposing anybody to any unnecessary risks, just so that people like me will have something to watch at 7:05 on a Tuesday night. There's really a risk reward calculus that I hope that we're taking seriously.
Talking about baseball in particular, there's been, and I've asked this question to pretty much every baseball fan I've talked to, a lot of new rules in place. You've got the DH in both leagues. You've got extra innings starting in the 10th inning. You'll have a runner at second base.
Right.
What are your thoughts on these rules to maybe spice up the game, speed up the pace of play? Do you think they're working? Because they've tried it with other rules like the pitch clock and what have you, and they've really only reduced minutes. Are you of the mindset that, look, baseball is baseball. It's not like other sports. This is the way the game is. If you don't like it, go watch another sport. Or do you think that these new rules help at all?
Well, I don't ever want to be somebody who tells someone else how to consume what they're consuming. So, I love baseball the way it is. Maybe you can call me a purist, whatever. But at the same time, I recognize that in order for it to stay competitive in the market, you have to make sure that you're attracting new fans. You have to make sure that you're, that you're getting people interested and excited in the game. I think that in a weird way, Major League Baseball has an opportunity this year in what's going to be a shortened season to really kind of, if this goes off, if we actually have a 60-game season, it's a chance to look at it in kind of a fishbowl and say, okay, well, is this something that really works? Is this something that's going to be a positive that we're going to want to continue? For example, the 3-batter minimum, right? When people come into the game, I've always thought that was going to be really interesting because, okay, well, now you've got guys who have spent their entire careers preparing themselves to be loogies, right? Lefty one out guys. And now they're basically legislated out of the game. Unless they got a real good changeup and they can get after right-handed guys, they're going to have trouble finding work in some cases. And so, changing the rules of the game midstream like that for folks like that, I kind of feel bad for them on some level. But at the same time, it is brutal watching a baseball game where you've got, here comes a call to the bullpen after a guy faces one hitter, and it just, that can be tough to watch. So I get what they're trying to accomplish, but I'm interested to see how it actually plays out and whether or not Major League Baseball is really going to use it as sort of an experimental thing to look at, and whether it works or not, we'll kind of have to see, and whether they do it moving forward. But I do remember, I'm a big fan of minor league baseball too, and they've had the extra innings rule for a couple of years. And, I guess I'm in favor of the whole guy on second base thing, if only because I think, I don't know if anybody really wants to see position players pitching. It results in some moments of great comedy from time to time, but I don't know if that's really something that's good for the game. And I think a lot of managers right now have made the decision that if it's a game that they're not going to win anyway, that they would much rather throw somebody out there, who's just going to throw some slop and some, 68-mile-an-hour dishes right up there in the middle of the plate. And I don't know if that benefits anybody. And I feel bad for the hitters to have to face those guys too, because it's like, well, you get struck out by one of those dudes like Adrian Gonzalez got struck out by Chris Davis back a few years ago. Yeah. You never live that down. So it's, so that's, I think it's just something that, I don't know, across the board, I don't love. And so my hope is that, if we don't have a 16-inning game, if we don't have a 13-inning game here and there, then we'll have a little bit less of that. So,
speaking of the Orioles, you mentioned you're a big fan, season ticket holders. I guess my question is, what happened? I mean, I remember really the Nats and the Orioles were bad for same amount of time, and then they started to resurge, especially when the
Mhm.
Orioles got Buck Showalter, and the
Yep.
Nats started to get some more talent around them. And then and I remember 2014, both teams looked like maybe we could see a Beltway series with how good they were. And then after that, the Orioles, really took a step in the wrong direction, and
Yep.
it's been tough to be a fan ever since. I remember, this past summer going to an Orioles-Astros game Friday night at Camden
Mhm.
Yards, fireworks. I mean, you got everything going on, and
Yep.
the stadium was relatively empty. So,
Yeah.
what do you think happened, and what needs to happen in order to change the culture, the trajectory of the team back to success? Because I mean, Camden Yards University is one of the best ballparks in baseball. I mean, they deserve a product out there that adapts to the ballpark. So what's your thoughts on everything that's happened with the Orioles?
No doubt, and I agree with that completely. So, having watched the team over the last several years, basically, I think what happened with the it was really the 2018 team that there were a lot of people kind of on both sides of the aisle. Some people saying, "Let's do the sell off now." Some people saying, "Let's try to compete for another year. Let's try to see if we can sign like an Alex Cobb to a 4-year deal worth $56 million." And I have always been sort of a ground up kind of guy. I like it when you're able to build a system through the farm and through prospects. Like I said, I love going to watch minor league games. And, it was really enjoyable for me to see that crop of guys like a Chris Tillman, like a Brian Mattis, like Matt Wieters, and guys who were drafted and came up through the system. I think what really happened is the group of guys kind of all got old at the same time, and they were behind the times as far as analytics went, and all of that ran into a buzzsaw of they had a really, really tough schedule at the beginning of that season in 2018. And I think they got off to something like 8-22 and 10-30 or something just horrible like that. And the wheels kind of all came off at the same time. The only guy who was hitting was Manny Machado. The pitching staff had holes all over it, and it was just, it was kind of poorly thought out. And I think that's a big reason why folks lost their jobs. Dan Duquette lost his job right after that in that whole process. Buck Showalter, I think, kind of got a raw deal. He's somebody who was universally beloved among the sort of the Orioles fan base. The bloom was off the rose a little bit because of what happened in the 2016 wild card game. I don't know if you remember that, but
Yep.
it was a 12-inning game, and it was Edwin Encarnacion hit a walk-off bomb. Should have been facing Zach Britton, but instead was facing Ubaldo Jimenez, who was another not so great long-term contract offer to a free agent pitcher. So, that sort of was the beginning of things going downhill. They were competitive in 2017. And then, like I said, in 2018, the wheels completely fell off. Chris Davis just totally cratered that year and is trying to sort of build himself back up. And then, they let go of Duquette and Showalter and hired in his place a guy named Mike Elias, who I actually am really thrilled to follow because he was a TJ guy. He was
Wow.
class of 2001. We were actually in school at the same time for 2 years. I never ran across him, but we were sort of in the same space at the same time. And the fact that he's now the general manager of my favorite baseball team is pretty cool. So that's one of the reasons why we're still in on it. It was a 45-win season last year, which was brutal. But actually, Allison and I had a pretty good record in the games we went to. So maybe I got to hit Mike up and be like, hey, we went 500 last year. You got to get us some free tickets. So, but it seems like they're building things in the right direction. They've had a couple good drafts and, made a couple of trades to get some guys in the minors, and the pitching stable now looks pretty good. It's something to look forward to for the next few years. I was really looking forward to going to a bunch of minor league games this year because those guys were going to be at Bowie and Frederick and sort of knocking on the door. You got Adley Rutschman, number 1 overall, who's going to be a force down the road. So, there's a lot to look forward to, I think, in Orioles Town moving forward. And the hope is that they don't lose a year of critical development because of what's going on this year.
And speaking of the Orioles, I was wondering, I've always wondered this, how many fans, if you had to put a percent on it, would you say are like you, grew up in Northern Virginia, but because when you were growing up, there was no team in DC, rooted for the Orioles and stayed with the Orioles even after the Nats came? What do you think there's a percentage on that? What would you say is the number for that, especially now, given the Nats' recent success? How many of those fans do you think are still there growing up in Northern Virginia, but have stuck with the Orioles even after the Nats came?
So most of the people that I know definitely transitioned over to Natstown, which is fine. I totally get it. It's something that the community had needed for a long time, and there was a lot of excitement over it. One of the things that influenced it, obviously, was, I was actually in Charlottesville at UVA when the Nats came in. So not only did they not exist when I was growing up, the time that they came into existence was when I was already in college and focused on my own stuff. You totally understand that, I'm sure. So it was just something that I kind of missed the boat on, I guess. Which I'll still root for the Nats. I enjoy watching them play. I think it's a very well-run organization. I think Mike Rizzo is one of the top talent evaluators in all of baseball, and I think they have one of the best radio teams too. I mentioned Charlie and Dave earlier when I was talking to you, and I think they're some of the best in the business. And I know those are guys that you probably want to emulate on some level. So that's I never got on that bus because I guess I wasn't around to get on it. But I think most of the people that I know definitely were Nats guys. So.
And speaking of your other team, University of Virginia, you're a diehard Who's fan. I
don't
don't think
hold that against me either.
Yeah, well, you were a Hokie for 1 year.
That's
true. To be
true.
fair, but what was your reaction when they won the championship? Because I mean, you remember the year before were the first number 1 seed to lose to a 16 seed, and then following year they have some tough games against Auburn in the Final Four. Some people say it was controversial the way it ended.
Sure.
And then, of course, Texas Tech. I mean, a couple of big shots there to send it to overtime, eventually win the championship. What impressed you most about that team, especially from a coaching standpoint with Tony Bennett?
So I think one of the hardest things about being a UVA basketball fan when that happened with UMBC, it was being a basketball coach and being able to watch the game and being able to see, oh yeah, okay, I see where the problem is. I can see exactly why this is a problem and where the point of struggle is going to be. I don't know if the folks that watch this have any interest in this, but people were always like, well, is losing DeAndre Hunter because of his injury, is that going to be a big deal? And some folks were like, well, the rest of the talent should carry them through. But it really was a big deal in that game because I've been a pack line guy, in no small part because of what UVA has done over the last few years. And, the way that UVA defends the pick and roll game is something that is very reliant on who it is that's doing the defending. And losing DeAndre sort of took a weapon away that gave them a lot of flexibility in how they were able to defend, but also how they were able to play on the offensive end. That UVA team, I had mentioned all year, they were way too reliant on the 3-ball, it's a great way to play offense. You can score a lot of points, but shooting from the outside can desert you at any time. And it did at the worst possible moment for them in that moment. UMBC was switching a lot during the course of the game. And one of the reasons they were able to get away with that is because UVA didn't have a player who could post up on the block and who could get you an easy bucket. And that was DeAndre Hunter. He was their most consistent guy, being able to post up against a smaller person, take advantage of the switch, and be able to go to work and get you an easy bucket. And that's part of the reason why I think the game got out of control. And, his ability to defend guys on the perimeter after the pick and roll situation was another thing that they missed a lot. And so that was really hard as a coach to be able to watch that game and go, I know exactly why the train is going off the tracks. This is so hard to watch and it's not going to get any better, and credit UMBC. I mean, they played an amazing game. And I think Jarris Lyles was totally lights out in that game. But, it was a function of UVA is built to win in the ACC. And when you have teams that play the kind of style that UMBC does, it can be really hard. But anyway, moving forward, it's just incredibly impressive to watch what happened with that team and the amount of pain and suffering that they went through. As a coach, one of the hardest things that you deal with is when you go into a game and you feel like you're definitely going to win that game. And then, things just don't go your way for whatever reason. And, sometimes it's strategy, sometimes it's just the ball bounces the wrong way. But that was obviously not UVA's night. And after having an incredible season up to that point and one that defied a lot of people's expectations. And so, to watch them bounce back from that to watch them go into the first game of the tournament that year against Gardner-Webb and go down by double digits in the first half again. And I mean, every UVA fan is sitting there going, oh my God, here we go again. But they, to their credit, I mean, they just kept doing what they do. It's not like they made any great adjustment to their style of play. They just kept grinding it out, kept getting shots, kept getting stops. And they did that for the entire rest of the tournament. And it felt like, with the way that the games ended against Purdue, where you're talking about Kihei Clark making that unbelievable 60-foot pass to Diakite to finish that shot at the buzzer, send it to overtime. And then, Auburn, we all thought the game was over. Any UVA fan watching it, as soon as that ball misses from Kyle Guy, you're like, oh, well, there goes that. It just felt like a team of destiny at a certain point. And I think Tony Bennett said it best when he said that, if you learn how to leverage adversity, it can buy you a ticket to a place that you couldn't have gotten anywhere else. And I think that was really the lesson that I took away from the experience, the roller coaster really, of watching that team go through what it went through. And it's just really special. It was really, to be an alum of that university. I was in one of my good friends, the Rousen family. Their kid is one that I coached in AAU ball. Is actually playing at Mary Washington right now and killing it. He was first team all league last year. But we were over at their house because they're UVA grads, and they had a number of fellow UVA grads along with them. And so to watch in that kind of environment was really special. We sang the good old song afterwards, and somebody caught it on film, so you got blackmail for me if you need it. But yeah, it was really a special experience.
Is there, I know you prefer college over the NBA. Is there anything about the NBA from either a fan perspective or a coach's perspective that you really enjoy watching?
Well, the individual talent is just unbelievable. I prefer watching the college game because it's a little bit more accessible to me. It's a little bit more accessible to the guys that I coach. In the NBA, a lot of times, it gets knocked for the defense in a lot of cases. The NBA is sort of, people will say, well, the guys don't really put forth a ton of effort on defense. I think that's a lot less the case now than it was maybe 5-10 years ago. And especially when you get down to playoff time, the defense is so good that in order to get a bucket, you have to be extraordinarily talented. And so, I can't necessarily show that to my guys and go, hey, you want to get a bucket, do this, because it's Kevin Durant, or it's LeBron, or it's, any number of or it's James Harden. And they can't do those things. And to ask them to try to do those things would be ridiculous. Or Steph, so those concepts are not necessarily translatable for my guys. But it is, if I want to watch, poetry in motion, if I want to watch guys who are just, they have the gift, then that's obviously something that I love to do. And I think, not having the college game available right now, I'm probably going to end up watching a lot more NBA ball this year than I have in the last several years combined, is my guess, just because I got that thirst for it. They got the TBT thing going on now. And so I've been taking in a little bit of that also. And you try to get your fix any way that you can. So
I got a few more questions for you to close out our conversation. We're going to kind of do this in a rapid fire mode. It doesn't have to be a one-word answer, but you can elaborate a little bit. But I know I'm sure like most of the other sports fans in America watch The Last Dance.
Oh, yeah.
Do you believe Michael Jordan's the greatest player of all time? Is there someone else close to him? I mean, you grew up obviously seeing that, unlike someone like me who really The Last Dance was good at portraying that. But what's your thoughts on that conversation, the GOAT conversation?
Short answer, yes. I think he is the greatest player of all time. And the reason is because, when he laced him up, you knew that he was going to win. You just knew. And with a lot of the other guys that have come through, LeBron, unbelievable player. LeBron is the most talented player we've ever seen in, I think, NBA history. But you don't know. When you go into that game, you don't know whether or not he's going to get his team over the hump. And that's no knock on him. Sometimes it's the guy around him. But, with Michael, you just knew. Every single night, you knew that he was going to find a way to get the job done.
What about the greatest quarterback of all time? Is it Tom Brady?
No. I'm going to go with I would actually go with Peyton Manning on that one.
Wow.
And I know he only, it's not as many rings as Tommy, but the way that guy dissects defenses and knows coverages and had all the throws. If he had a better defense playing around him, I think he would have won a lot more rings.
What about your Mount Rushmore of coaches, and either college or the NBA. If you only had to put 4 on there, who would you say is your Mount Rushmore coaches?
Basketball?
Yeah, basketball.
All right. Pop would be on that list. I would say Phil Jackson has got to be on that list. And I think you really got to see that in The Last Dance with the types of egos that he had to manage. Oh my God. I mean, having talent is one thing, but being able to get all those guys together, just unbelievable. I would say, oh man, I'm going to get killed for these, but I would say probably
Coach K or anybody on the college level that sticks out to you? Or?
I've never been a big Duke guy. That's just me. But oh man, oh goodness. Let's see. So I got Pop. We got Phil Jackson. I would say I haven't had a chance to think about this in a long time. But I would say, oh goodness, this is terrible content that I'm giving you right now.
Oh, no problem. Red Auerbach, maybe.
Well, I would say, you know what? I'll say Dean Smith, because I think Dean Smith was an incredible innovator early on in some of the earliest phases of college basketball as we know it right now, sort of the modern era. I think Dean Smith is definitely really high on that list. And I think I'll go with John Wooden also. He always had a tremendous amount of talent behind him, but I think he was extraordinarily influential to many coaches, not just in his time, but in the modern day as well, just in terms of the approach to the game, the approach to life, I think. I'll put Greg Popovich, Phil Jackson, Dean Smith, and John Wooden.
What about Pop or Phil? Who had the better career? I know championships, it's obviously Phil, but Pop, I mean, from a consistency standpoint, really just had Tim Duncan and an aging David Robinson at the end, but built the success around those teams. Who would you rather have the career, Phil or Pop?
Oh, man. I would probably go with Pop just because I think he had, I don't know, I think he had a little bit tougher battles in a lot of cases. So, and obviously, Michael Jordan, you have him. That's a pretty good start. So it's nothing against Phil, just, but Popovich, I think in-game adjustments, being able to manage his team, being able to get the most out of him and get them to play together, I think was the really exceptional thing with that team.
I agree with you. Pop, and also he's big these days, doing a lot to speak out in terms of social issues as well as coaches.
Him and Steve Kerr. I think you really hear a lot of good stuff out of those guys. That's really positive.
And that's the question I wanted to ask you, because I think people say this with Steve Kerr and Phil Jackson. Oh, these guys have had great players. That's why they've won a lot of rings. But my point is, Michael Jordan never won a ring without Phil Jackson. Kobe Bryant and Shaq didn't win a championship until Phil Jackson came into town. I mean, you know this better than anybody. The coaches have a say. I mean, yeah, you need the great players, but I think you need the coach that can bring in these guys and ultimately take them to the promised land.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that, it's finding that chemistry. It's, there are certain players who are extraordinarily talented who have to be coached by certain guys who have, there are certain personality quirks that they have where the fit just has to be right. And there are certain coaches who need a certain personality type of player as well. And when you get them on the same page and get that special sauce, it's magic, but it's really an individual case by case situation. I'd love to be able to sit here. It's the coaching or it's the players or whatever, but it's really more complicated than that. And I think any coach would really tell you the same thing. It's a difficult balance especially when you have a lot of talent to keep everybody happy and to keep all the voices in the room where they need to be. And that's one of the reasons why I think the documentary was so great, is because you got to see just how difficult that was. And I promise you didn't see like maybe even 10% of what went on behind the scenes there. There's a lot that probably went untold, but at the same time, when you coach for, it makes me sound old saying it, when you do this for as long as I have, you recognize that it really is, it's a group project, and you gotta have everybody rowing the boat in the same direction. And if you get that, then it can be really special.
What about what do you think is the next best sports documentary? We just saw The Last Dance. What do you think would make a great sports documentary, whether something that hasn't happened yet or something that happened recently? Is there anything you think, man, that would be a really great story to focus on? Next 30 for 30.
That would be interesting. I would love to see, I'd love to see a 30 for 30 on the Astros trash can scandal.
Wow.
That would make me really happy to see something that really goes into the details of that. I think that would be, it would be topical, it would be present, because me, I don't pretend like I'm, I don't know what the word is, but I don't pretend like I'm perfect when it comes to this stuff, but I really am a huge believer in integrity. I'm a huge believer that you try to do things the right way, that you play fair, that you engage in good sportsmanship at all times, that you don't cheat even when the opportunity is presented to you. That's always been something that's really important to me. And so to see things come down with the Astros, and I guess with the Red Sox too, that happened the way they did, it's just really disappointing. And it, you want to be able to believe in what goes on from a sports perspective. One of the hardest things I had to deal with as a fan was one of my favorite baseball players was Rafael Palmeiro. For a long time. Beautiful left-handed swing, great power hitter, consistent, hit 38, 40 home runs every year, and just a joy to watch. And then he ends up getting mixed up in the whole steroid issue. And it's like, man, that just, it kills you as a fan, because you want to believe in these things. And so, I would like to, it would be cathartic on some level, I guess, to see something come out on the Astros and what happened there. Great question, though.
I would say, sticking with baseball, I think it'd be great to see a Cal Ripken 30 for 30, especially because they talked about long gone summer saving the game after the strike. But I mean, Cal, that happened in '95. I mean, you remember that as an Orioles fan. I think that would be a great story. And, Cal has really done a good job standing up for the game, being a good ambassador. I think you could find a way to connect it too with Lou Gehrig back in the 40s. So I think that would be a great one too.
Cal is my sports hero, and then people have asked me that question before, and that's always my answer. And the reason is because he was a great player, tremendous servant of the community, tremendous Baltimore guy, tremendous Oriole. But what the guy is known for is showing up to work every single day and just being reliable, being consistent. I've always said to my guys, your best ability is your availability. And if you don't have that, you don't have much. So, so he's sort of the guy I always looked up to as a kid. Is the reason I never missed a practice when I was in high school, never missed a team event. And, I try to demand the same out of my guys to the extent that it's reasonable to do so. But yeah, Cal is really, really important in my life from a sports perspective.
My final question for you, Coach, is like you talked about, you coach the Nova Cavs, you coach your alma mater, and TJ, you've been doing that now for well over a decade. Are you satisfied with where you at? Do you see yourself in 5-10 years? You think maybe you'd like to pursue that challenge? Or are you pretty content at the moment with where you're at coaching wise and professional wise?
I mean, I love the TJ community. I've always been, probably its biggest fan and cheerleader for many years. I just recently accepted a job at a private school. This past year I've been doing it for about a year now. I've been doing admissions over at Basis Independent McLean, which is sort of an up and coming private school in the Tysons area, and I've gotten to know that community really well also. But I've always had a tremendous fondness for TJ and for that community, and I sort of take things on a year-over-year basis and see, what's the right thing for us, what's the right thing for the community moving forward. I'm looking forward to seeing what happens this upcoming year with respect to, do we have a high school basketball season? I know we touched on that a little bit earlier, but we'll see what happens. But I love those people. I love those kids, those communities, and the people that I've had the privilege to work for, Sean DeRose, Rusty Hodges, the principals, Evan Glazer, and Bonatadabas, great people, and people who want to take care of that community. And it's been one of the great honors of my career, being the steward of that program for as long as I have been.
Coach, can't tell you how much I appreciated this conversation. Obviously, it had been a while since we had talked, so it was, in a sense, good to catch up as well. Thank you for all you do for your community, and looking forward to seeing what's next and keeping in touch.
Absolutely. Feel free to call back anytime. It was a pleasure to be with you today.
Thank you so much to Coach Mark Gray-Mendes for joining us on the latest edition of The Pulse with BP. I'm your host, Billy Parvatam. Thank you again for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.